It began with thirst, not the kind you feel after a jog or a hot day, but the kind that strips the soul bare. Your tongue swells, your lips crack, and every heartbeat feels like it's pulling the last drop of moisture from your veins. In the deserts of North Africa during World War II, thirst was not an inconvenience. It was an enemy, silent, invisible, and merciless. Between 1940 and 1943, the North African campaign turned the Sahara into one of the harshest battlefields in history. From the dunes of El Alamein to the rocky wastes of Libya, British, American, German, and Italian soldiers fought not only each other, but the desert itself. And for every bullet fired, there was a battle no one saw, the fight to find water. Imagine the world reduced to two colors, sand and sky. The air ripples with heat, the horizon dances like water, but delivers only disappointment. You march in full gear, helmet, rifle, ammunition, through a furnace where the ground itself burns your boots. By noon, temperatures reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit, 49 degrees Celsius. Canteens boiled, tires melted, engines coughed and died like living things gasping for air. In diaries recovered from the Afrika Korps and British Eighth Army, one phrase appears over and over again: water is life. Soldiers wrote about trading cigarettes, rations, even ammunition, for a single sip. They learned the hard way that in North Africa, a man could live for weeks wounded, but only 3 days without water. Every army in North Africa faced the same cruel arithmetic. A single man needed at least 1 gallon of water per day, not just to drink, but for cooking and hygiene. A tank crew needed 5. A division, hundreds of thousands of gallons daily. But there were no rivers, no wells for miles, only endless sand. The British solved part of the problem with convoys. Thousands of water trucks traveling hundreds of miles from ports in Egypt and Libya. Each convoy was a lifeline, and everyone risked destruction from German Stukas and desert ambushes. Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps faced the same challenge. His troops called water das flüssige Gold, liquid gold. Rommel's engineers developed systems of mobile condensers, machines that turned vehicle exhaust into water vapor, producing just enough to fill a few canteens a day. But for the men on the ground, the real solutions were older, simpler, and far more ingenious. Long before the war, desert nomads and Bedouins had learned how to coax water out of nothing. They knew that even in the driest sand, moisture hides where sun and wind cannot reach, in the shadows, in the roots, and in the morning dew. When Allied forces landed in North Africa in 1942, they quickly realized that local knowledge was worth more than any manual. British patrols began recruiting desert guides, men who could read the dunes like maps. They taught soldiers the old tricks of survival. Watch where birds circle at dawn. They gather near hidden springs. Follow green shrubs. Their roots mean moisture below. Dig in the lee side of dunes, not the sun side. The cooler sand holds condensation. Collect dew on cloth at sunrise and wring it into canteens. To the city-bred soldiers of London or Chicago, it sounded like magic. To the Bedouin, it was just knowledge, passed down through centuries of thirst. But the most remarkable discovery wasn't ancient. It was improvised. In the summer of 1942, a British engineer named Major Ralph Bagnold, founder of the Long Range Desert Group, studied how heat and condensation could work together to make water. His men were operating hundreds of miles behind enemy lines, cut off for weeks at a time. Carrying water for that long was impossible. So they built something extraordinary, the solar still. Using only a shovel, a piece of canvas, a cup, and sunlight, they created a machine that turned sand into survival. The process was simple, almost elegant. Dig a pit about 3 feet deep. Place a cup at the bottom. Cover the hole with a sheet of plastic or canvas, weighted in the center with a stone. Seal the edges with sand. As the sun heated the ground, moisture from plants, soil, and even sweat from old uniforms evaporated, condensed on the underside of the cover, and dripped into the cup below. It took hours, but by nightfall a man could collect enough to drink, a miracle born from heat itself. The method spread quietly through Allied ranks. Some soldiers called it the sand still. Others nicknamed it Bagnol's Well. Whatever the name, it meant life. In the endless dunes between Tobruk and Tripoli, soldiers dug holes everywhere. Sometimes they struck salt water, sometimes oil. But occasionally they hit a pocket of ancient groundwater, a remnant of prehistoric lakes buried beneath the Sahara. When they did, the camp would erupt in cheers. Men would drink, wash, and refill every container they had. They would even pour some on their helmets just to feel human again. But there was a darker side. For every successful well, 10 more collapsed or turned toxic. Salt poisoning became a common killer. The body, desperate for hydration, would drink anything and die faster because of it. Veteran medics began teaching a grim mantra: better know water than bad water. It wasn't superstition, it was experience. To survive the desert, armies had to change their mindset. They created what became known as water discipline. Every man carried 1 canteen, sometimes 2. No one drank freely. Officers enforced strict schedules, 1 sip every hour, no exceptions. Men who broke discipline risked more than punishment. They risked death. In the 7th Armored Division, the famous Desert Rats, soldiers learned to treat each drop like treasure. They reused their shaving water to clean rifles. They poured leftover tea into radiators. They learned to sleep with canteens under their arms so that even body heat couldn't make it evaporate. Some troops joked, "We drink sweat, piss, and prayer in that order." But behind the joke was truth. Hydration wasn't luck. It was strategy. Across the desert, German and Italian soldiers faced the same torment. Rommel's Afrika Korps carried water in aluminum drums strapped to trucks, each marked Nur Wasser, for water only. But the desert was merciless. Metal expanded under heat, seals cracked, and gallons evaporated every day. To conserve supplies, German engineers invented canvas water bags, porous enough that as water seeped through, it evaporated on the surface, cooling the rest inside. It was brilliant, a simple fabric trick that turned physics into survival. The British soon copied it, calling them desert chillers. Even captured German canteens became prizes, not for their metal, but for their design. But the cruelest battle wasn't physical, it was psychological. Thirst changes the brain. Hallucinations come easily when the horizon itself lies to you. Soldiers would chase mirages for miles, believing they saw water glimmering in the distance. In one report from 1941, a British patrol followed what they thought was a blue lake for 6 hours. It turned out to be a patch of sky reflected on salt crust. By nightfall, 2 men were dead. Medical officers learned to treat dehydration not just with water, but with restraint. Too much too fast could kill a man almost as surely as thirst. The stomach, shrunk and starved, would seize. So they rationed hope the same way they rationed water, in measured doses. Not every story was tragedy. Sometimes the desert gave mercy, if you knew where to look. In 1942, a unit of the U.S. 1st Armored Division became stranded after a supply truck was destroyed near Medellin, Tunisia. For 3 days, they marched without water. On the 4th, a private noticed insects swarming around a crack in the ground. He dug with his mess tin and hit damp clay. By nightfall, they'd opened a small seep, barely enough to fill helmets, but it saved 15 men. Another report from the Long-Range Desert Group tells of soldiers collecting dew with parachute silk, laying it flat at night, and wringing out handfuls of cool droplets at dawn. It sounded impossible, but under the right conditions, it worked. They didn't conquer the desert. They outsmarted it. Modern researchers later confirmed what those soldiers had learned through suffering. The human body loses about a liter of water per hour in desert heat. Dehydration begins when you've lost just 2%. At 10%, you lose reason. At 15%, you lose life. Every method the soldiers used, from condensation traps to canvas bags, worked because it exploited one universal truth. Water is always moving. It shifts from air to ground, from body to sky, never gone, only hidden. The men who survived weren't the strongest. They were the ones who learned to find that hidden flow. When the North African campaign ended in May 1943, tens of thousands of men left behind more than wrecked tanks and shells. They left lessons etched not in books, but in bone. The British Eighth Army logged over 150,000 cases of dehydration during the campaign. Thousands more suffered kidney damage or heat stroke that would last a lifetime. But they also left behind a legacy of desert survival science that would shape exploration, aviation, and even space research. NASA engineers studying lunar habitats in the 1960s looked back to those same wartime innovations: the solar still, the condensation trap, the recycling of waste moisture. The techniques born from desperation became the blueprint for survival beyond Earth itself. But the most profound lesson wasn't technological. It was human. A captured German officer once said after El Alamein, "In the desert, we stopped being enemies. We were all just thirsty men looking for water." There were stories, real ones, of Allied patrols sharing wells with German prisoners, of British medics treating dehydrated Italians even as shells fell in the distance. Because in that world of dust and heat, the difference between friend and foe mattered less than the distance to the next drop of water. Today, if you walk through the deserts of Libya or Egypt, you can still find remnants of that invisible war: rusting water drums half buried in sand, faded markings, water not fuel, broken canteens, and sometimes fragments of canvas still stiff with salt. The dunes shift, but the evidence remains: a silent record of men who fought thirst as fiercely as they fought each other. They remind us that survival has never been about strength or technology. It's about knowledge, about paying attention to the smallest clues: a bird in the distance, a patch of green, a whisper of moisture underfoot. The desert doesn't forgive, but it rewards those who listen. When people talk about World War II, they remember the tanks, the battles, the victories. But somewhere between Tobruk and El Alamein, in a place where sand met sky, thousands of men learned a quieter truth: that sometimes the greatest enemy is the one you cannot see, and the greatest victory is simply waking up to another dawn with a sip of water in your hands. They were soldiers, they were survivors, and their story, their fight against thirst, belongs to history as much as any battle ever fought.